George Foreman has said a big piece of me has died today. Floyd Mayweather has said there will never be another like him. Welcome to Indian Express. Today we are mourning the death of Muhammad Ali, arguably the greatest sportsman in the history of the game. I have with me Jonathan. Jonathan, he was the greatest sportsman, there is no doubt about it. But was he the greatest boxer of all time as well? What are your thoughts?
Ali was undoubtedly a candidate for the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time, and it's no small achievement in itself. The heavyweight division is the flagship division of boxing, simply
That's right.
because you're the biggest guy and the baddest guy around.
Yeah.
Ali himself said that Sugar Ray Robinson, who was a welterweight and a middleweight boxer, was probably a better boxer than him.
Yeah.
And there have been boxers who have had perfect records, 49-0 for Rocky Marciano, one of the great heavyweight who was before Ali's time.
Right.
And obviously Floyd Mayweather, who spoke of Ali, has a perfect record himself.
Yeah.
But the fact Ali transcended the sport in a way that no guy has or had done before him or has done after him.
Right.
Purely from a boxing perspective.
Why? Why? Because was he glamorous? Was he so dominant?
It was a combination of the culture he grew up, of the culture he was in, and the role he played in that culture. He wasn't just a part of his time. He shaped the time he was in. But speaking of his boxing, Ali's career spanned 4 decades. If you think about it, like the 50s and his amateur career, where he won the Olympic gold medal in the 1960, to be fair. The 60s, when he began his professional career and was suspended for his opposition to the Vietnam War. The 70s and the 80s, where he fought 2 fights and his career kind of ended in the 80s. But the 60s and 70s were his greatest careers, the years of his careers.
Right.
And the 60s were the years where he became world champion for the first time as a very young 22-year-old. And the 70s were the years that defined Ali as probably the greatest boxer, heavyweight boxer at least.
And the guy he defeated at that time went on to become champion even in the 90s, George Foreman, for that matter.
The 70s were the greatest decade of heavyweight boxing. There has never been a decade like it.
Right.
In fact, as you said, a guy who in the 70s was a world champion, George Foreman, would 2 decades later on come back in the 90s and he would hold his own and become world champion again. That just shows the class which the 70s had. You could go all down the line in the 70s and you would find boxers that would be contenders and champions in any other era of boxing. And Ali was the best among all of them.
He was top of the food chain at that time.
He was top of the food chain, and the fact is that a boxer like him, he made all of these other guys their legacy. He made it irrelevant, and you didn't realize how good they were until a few decades afterwards, because how good Ali was, how bad Ali made them look.
Right.
So that's how good he was.
But that was one facet of his life, a great boxer, but he was more than that. Now, boxing as a sport is not like the most popular sport in the world. But Ali, how did Ali become the most popular athlete and probably one of the most popular person around at that time?
It's a good point which you make, because for example, when we see Ali, we see a guy who's transcended the sport, but we forget that boxing wasn't the most popular sport when he started.
That's right.
In fact, when Ali fought Liston in a second bout, in the Ali Liston second bout, it was the lowest watched heavyweight bout in history, and you can't even imagine.
Even worse than Tyson Fury versus Klitschko.
It doesn't count. We had like 8,000 people watching. It doesn't even count. But Ali made the sport bigger than the sport itself.
Right.
He was an icon of his times.
That's right.
He was a cultural touchstone, so to speak.
Right.
That's why it's very unlikely that you'll see another person like Ali in the future.
Like hanging out with the Beatles, hanging out with Nelson Mandela.
It's just a combination of everything. Like he's a person who just moved beyond the sport. Like the sport does this. He couldn't be. He's more than the sum of his talents. And his talents were more than that could be restricted within the corners of the ring. There is simply too much of him for the ring.
So was it just the sheer timing? There could have been some other boxer, hypothetically, who could have become as popular. My question is, when Floyd Mayweather says that there will never be another Ali, do you agree with this statement?
I kind of agree, simply because boxing doesn't have the same cultural relevance as it had back in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
A person like Ali, a black man who's fighting for self-respect.
Yeah.
The same principles exist, but they aren't the passions, the heated passions which underlie these things don't exist anymore.
Why he remains relevant today? Donald Trump yesterday said, "My African American."
Yeah.
So he remains relevant.
Ali remains relevant.
Right.
It's difficult to see another sports person occupying the same role as Ali did back in the day, simply because of the kind of tough decisions which he made. It's impossible to think of any sports person right now who would put like 3 of his best years of his life on the line for a principle which he believed in, and with a principle which made him the villain to many people. He was called a traitor, and he did this a long way before it became cool.
Right.
Like his opposition to the Vietnam War came before it became cool to be opposed to the Vietnam War.
That's right.
A lot of guys.
That's a very significant point. Like he opposed the Vietnam War in 1966-67, whereas all the rock stars, they jumped on the bandwagon much later.
Later on, like he paid the penalty for this. He lost millions of dollars, the best years of his career.
And probably by doing so, he also missed out on being probably the best boxer of all time, unarguably. But that ironically made him the greatest sportsman of all time. That's the irony of Ali's life. But a great sportsman has gone. But this is not the time to mourn. I think this is probably the time to celebrate his life. Thank you for watching.